"Do you like the house, Dad?" Her voice was soft, almost trembling with pride, as if she had just placed a crown on my head. I turned to look at Hermie's daughter, Mia. Her eyes sparkled like they used to when she was 5, showing me her finger paintings. Only this time, instead of paper and crayons, it was a $1.2 million gift overlooking Lake Erie. I looked around. High ceilings, polished floors, a view that could have been from a movie. Everything was so perfect, and yet I had never felt so out of place. "It's impressive," I murmured. She grinned, radiant, like she'd just scored the winning goal. "It's smart, Dad. Everything's automated. You don't even have to move if you don't want to. And the floors? Heated. No more cold feet in winter. Heated floors." My chest ached at the thought. Once upon a time, cold tiles meant it was Saturday morning and your mother was brewing coffee. Cold tiles meant I was alive, still strong enough to fix the heater with my own hands. I had them stock the fridge with that potato salad you like, the one from Kroger, not Whole Foods, she added, as if that detail made it more personal. "You can watch all your old cowboy movies on voice command now." She meant well. God, she always did. She'd made it. From late-night study sessions to a corner office in San Francisco. The last 25 years, she'd worked her way up through layers of code and investors and men who doubted her. And she never looked back. Not once. Not until today. "I wanted to surprise you for Father's Day," she said, stepping closer. "The company gave me stock. I cashed some in. This is yours now." I took a breath, slow, shaky. "It's very thoughtful." She laughed. "You always say that when you're overwhelmed." "No, honey, I say that when I don't have the heart to tell you something's wrong." My fingers brushed the armrest of the leather couch. Cold, untouched, no wrinkles, no fatting, no story. I thought of the recliner back home, ripped at the seams, dipped in the middle. That chair had held your mother every Sunday morning. That chair smelled like her. "You don't have to worry anymore," Mia continued, mistaking my silence for uncertainty. "There's a nurse who'll stop by twice a week. The hallway lights turn on automatically when you get up at night. And look," she held up a device. "This little thing can call me, the ambulance, anyone. Just press and hold." I took the device in my hand. It felt like surrender. "Mia," I started. She blinked. "What?" I looked into her eyes. They were still my little girl's eyes, but they didn't see what I saw. "This doesn't feel like home." She froze. The smile faded. "You don't like it?" "No, I didn't say that. I miss my own bed. I miss the creaks in the floor. I miss the porch swing." Her lips parted, but no words came. "I miss the sound of the fridge rattling in the middle of the night, and the mail slot that whistles when the wind's just right." "Dad," she said, voice trembling, "I just wanted you to be safe. I know, comfortable. I know, happy." I looked down at the floor. These tiles wouldn't remember my footsteps. "You gave me a palace, Mia, but I think I needed a hug." The silence between us was deafening. She sat beside me, slowly, like a child realizing she broke something fragile. "I didn't mean to take you away from everything," she whispered. "You didn't take me, sweetheart. You just forgot where I've always been." Outside, the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, but in my chest, a storm was rising. She would leave tonight, back to her city of glass towers and glowing screens. And I would stay here, surrounded by perfection but haunted by absence. When she hugged me goodbye, I held on just a second too long. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll try to get used to it." She waved one last time at the doorway. Then she was gone. The silence in that house was louder than any siren. I stood still, breathing in the sterile air. No scent of brewed coffee. No faint echo of a radio playing old Sinatra. Just silence, and the ticking of a wall clock too new to be late. I walked to the window, looked out at the lake. Then I said it aloud, so someone might hear. "This isn't home." And for the first time since her mother passed, I felt something I couldn't fix. Not with my hands, not with my heart, not even with time. If you've ever had to say goodbye to a place that held your memories, your dreams, or someone you loved deeply, please like this story, leave a comment to share your own goodbye, and subscribe so you don't miss how Tom's journey unfolds. Sometimes, letting go is just the beginning. I woke up to silence. Not the kind of silence you find in early mornings with birds chirping outside your window or distant dogs barking at the mailman. No, this was a different kind, thick, manufactured silence, like the kind they build into luxury cars or hospital rooms. It wrapped around me like a vacuum, sterile and indifferent. The lights had already adjusted to my motion. A soft glow lit the hallway as I stepped out of the bedroom, barefoot on the warm tiles. They really were heated. My late wife would have loved that, I thought. But then again, she also loved mismatched socks and drafty windows. She used to say, "If it ain't got a chill, it ain't got a soul." I wandered through the house, touching surfaces out of habit more than curiosity. The glass countertop in the kitchen, the chrome handles of the refrigerator, the smooth panel of the thermostat that responded like a polite but distant stranger. Everything gleamed, but none of it knew me. I tried to picture where the coffee maker was, and when I found it sitting sleek and silent beneath a cabinet, I realized I didn't know how to use it. There were no buttons, just a screen, cold and black, waiting for a voice command. "Brew coffee," I said, hesitant. Nothing. I cleared my throat. "Make coffee." A soft chime, then the machine whirred to life. Liquid gold poured into a spotless mug already sitting on the tray. I took a sip. It tasted pheneric, balanced, expertly brewed, but there was no story in the taste. No burnt edges from forgetting the filter. No extra scoop for those long, aching mornings. Just correct. I walked to the window, looking out over the lake again. The water didn't move like it did back home. Maybe it was the angle, or maybe it was my mood, but the lake looked frozen in time, like a painting. Too pristine. I missed the tiny waves lapping against the worn dock behind our old house, the creaking rope that held up the tire swing Mia once loved. Back in the hallway, I noticed the closet doors opened by themselves as I approached. Motion sensors, I guessed. Inside were brand new shirts, pressed and arranged by color, shoes lined up like soldiers. Mia had thought of everything, except whether I wanted any of it. I sat on the couch barely creased from yesterday and turned on the television using the remote she'd labeled Dad. A voice menu popped up. "What would you like to watch?" it asked. I didn't answer. I didn't want to speak to a television. I wanted to hear the static buzz of an old set warming up, the thump when you hit the side to fix the signal. I turned it off. Instead, I stared at the bookshelf, another thing Mia had stocked in advance. History books, novels, biographies of tech moguls. No fishing magazines, no old westerns, not even a crossword puzzle book. This place wasn't built for me. It was built for someone who looked like me, someone who ate clean, thought digital, lived efficiently. Not for a man who kept broken radios just to fix them one day. I found myself opening drawers. I don't know why. Maybe I hoped to find something real, a forgotten penny, a receipt, something that said a human being had been here before me. But every drawer was empty or perfectly arranged. No surprises, no clutter, not even dust. I ended up in the guest room, which looked identical to mine but mirrored. There, on the dresser, was a small photo frame. Mia had placed it there, probably thinking it would make me smile. It was a picture of the two of us in her cap and gown, me in a borrowed suit, awkwardly smiling. I remembered the day well. I had driven 14 hours to make it to her graduation, only to sit in the back row because I was late. I'd gotten lost, refused to use GPS, but when she saw me afterward, she cried. She hugged me and whispered, "You came," as if there had ever been a chance I wouldn't. Now I wondered if she thought that version of me still existed, the man who could just uproot and smile at whatever new world she handed him. I carried the photo frame back into the living room and placed it on the coffee table. It looked out of place there, surrounded by modern art and untouched coasters. But at least it was something real. The day dragged on. I opened the fridge, took out a container of potato salad, and ate standing at the counter. It tasted the same as always, but without the laughter or arguments that usually accompanied it. I cleaned up, even though the dishwasher was smarter than I was. Old habits die hard. By evening, I hadn't said a single word out loud since morning. My throat felt tight. I called Mia, but it went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I wrote a note. "Mia, thank you for everything. I know you meant this place to be a gift, but it's not home. I need to breathe old air again, walk on creaky floors, feel memories press against my bones. I'm going back." I left the coffee machine on. Love, Dad. I folded it, left it on the counter where she'd see it next time. I packed a single bag, just essentials. The photo frame, an old sweater, my shaving kit, and the worn paperback Mom used to read aloud. I grabbed my cane, stepped outside, and took one last look at the lake. It shimmered like silver, but silver's not gold. Gold is warm, imperfect, earned over time. I caught the 6:10 bus heading west. No heated seats, no autopilot, just the low rumble of diesel and a driver who nodded silently when I said, "Dayton, please." And as the city lights faded behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt since yesterday. I felt human again. The bus groaned as it pulled away from the last stop, the sky above stained with the soft bruise of approaching dusk. My fingers tightened around the duffel bag on my lap as Dayton's familiar skyline, more modest than impressive, began to emerge in the window. It had only been 2 days since I left, but it felt like a season had passed. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. No grand arrival, no fanfare, just me and a return ticket punched quietly at the station. The driver, an older man with a silver beard and eyes like dull coins, gave me a knowing look when I told him the address. "Used to be the best pie in that neighborhood," he said. I smiled. "Still is, if you know whose door to knock on." The bus stopped 2 blocks from the house. I got off slowly, my knees protesting, and stood there for a moment, letting the air fill my lungs. It was different, gritty, imperfect, but it had life. The scent of gasoline, someone barbecuing nearby, the hum of a lawnmower in the distance, it all pulsed with memory. As I approached the house, the porch came into view, and I stopped in my tracks. The swing was still there, faded, one chain a little too loose, creaking slightly in the breeze, and on the swing was Mrs. Carmichael, my neighbor of 20 years, wrapped in her Sunday cardigan, though it was only Thursday. She squinted at me, then broke into a grin. "Well, I'll be damned," she called out. "Thought they shipped you off to Florida for good." "Just a trial run," I said, chuckling, making my way up the steps. She stood to hug me, bones thin but strong. "Place don't feel right without you, Tom." I opened the front door, keys still fitting like they were waiting for me. The house exhaled as I stepped inside, wood groaning, pipes humming softly. Dust floated in the sunlight that poured through the windows, and everything smelled like age and truth. I dropped my bag by the couch, touched the wall as if to make sure it was still real. The photos were still crooked on the mantel, the clock still 2 minutes slow, the air still held the scent of coffee grounds and yesterday's rain. That night, I lit the stove the old-fashioned way, turned on the radio, and listened to the jazz station from Cincinnati. They were playing Coltrane. I poured myself a glass of something warm and sat at the kitchen table, eyes closed, feeling every note. No touchscreen in sight, no automated voice waiting for instructions. Just me, a vinyl chair, and the slow unraveling of everything I had held inside. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. My back ached, my knees throbbed, but it was my bed, my window, my pain. I made coffee with my hands, ground the beans, boiled the water, let it sit a minute too long like she used to. The first sip was bitter, nostalgic. It tasted like 1978 and burned toast. I stood in the kitchen, holding that cup like it was a trophy. Later that day, I walked down to Lenny's hardware. Lenny wasn't there anymore, he passed last winter, but his boy ran it now. The bell over the door still rang out of tune, and the aisles were still a mess. "Mr. Thompson," the kid said when he saw me. "Heard you moved." "Turns out I wasn't done here yet," I replied. I bought nails, some sandpaper, a gallon of white paint. The porch steps had been needing attention for years, and now, with no agenda, I had all the time in the world. Over the next few days, I painted, repaired, re-oiled every hinge I could find. Neighbors dropped by, some with pies, some with curiosity. Everyone wanted to know why I came back. I gave them the only answer I had: because this place remembers me. It was on the 5th morning that I got the call, Mia. I hesitated before answering, letting it ring once more than necessary. "Dad?" Her voice was small, tentative. "I'm here," I said. There was silence on the other end, then a breath. "You left without saying goodbye." "I left a note." "That's not the same." "I know." I checked the cameras. "You took the photo, the one from graduation." I needed something true to bring with me. More silence. Are you mad at me? She finally asked. No. I'm grateful, Mia. You gave me something beautiful, but it wasn't mine. But I thought you'd be happy. I know, baby. And that's what breaks my heart. She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing. Then, softly, I just wanted to make up for the time I missed. I was always working, always moving. I thought if I gave you something big enough, maybe it would say what I couldn't. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You don't have to buy your way back to me, Mia. Just sit with me on the porch sometimes. That's enough. She let out a breath that cracked in the middle. Can I come home? Always. And just like that, the echo in the hallway that had followed me out of that smart house began to quiet. Because home, I realized, isn't just where you hang your hat. It's where someone remembers why you wear it the way you do. As I hung up the phone, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the porch like it hadn't in months. I poured another cup of coffee, grabbed my toolbox, and headed outside. The wind carried the scent of fresh paint and earth, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel alive. I felt found. 3 days after our call, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel just past noon. I was sitting on the porch, fixing the swing chain, making sure the old girl could still hold 2 people and a summer's worth of conversations. I looked up and saw Mia's black sedan ease into the driveway, the same one I helped her buy all those years ago when she got her first promotion. She stepped out slowly, uncertain, like she was walking into a memory too sacred to disturb. She wasn't wearing the sharp heels or tailored coat this time. Just jeans, sneakers, and a pale blue sweater that used to belong to her mother. My heart clenched at the sight. She looked older, not in the face, but in the weight she carried on her shoulders. The kind that comes from trying too hard to fix what was never broken. "Hey, Dad," she said, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Hey, sweetheart," I replied, setting down the wrench and standing up slower than I meant to. We didn't hug immediately. She stood at the bottom of the steps, staring at the porch like it was some kind of monument. Her eyes swept over the chipped paint, the crooked railing I hadn't fixed yet, the flower pots with more dirt than life. Then she smiled a tired, nostalgic smile. "Still smells like varnish and coffee. And motor oil if you wait until the breeze shifts," I said. She walked up the steps and sat on the swing. It creaked beneath her, but it held. I sat beside her. The chain groaned in that old familiar rhythm, like the house was clearing its throat after too much silence. "I stopped at the bakery on 5th, she said, holding out a brown paper bag. "Got the cinnamon rolls you like. They still make 'em with extra glaze?" I bribed the cashier. We shared one, the sticky sweetness clinging to our fingers like the years we were trying to glue back together. She didn't rush into questions or explanations, and I didn't offer any. For a long while, we just sat, watching the world pass by at its usual slow-paced kids on bikes, someone mowing the lawn, a dog barking at a squirrel. Finally, she spoke. "I walked through the house before coming here. Yours, I mean. It felt sacred, like I was trespassing on something holy. It's just an old place," I said softly. "No, it's not. It's history. It's comfort. It's you." She turned to me, eyes watering. "I wanted to erase all the cracks in your life, Dad. I didn't realize they were the parts that held you together. That hit me harder than I expected." I looked at her, at the woman she'd become, fierce, successful, tender in ways she didn't know how to show. "You didn't erase anything, Mia. You just gave me another kind of love. It didn't fit, but it still meant everything." She wiped her eyes, laughing through the tears. "I should have asked what you wanted instead of assuming I knew." "Assuming's not a crime," I said. "Staying quiet when you realize you were wrong, that's the mistake." We sat there until the sun began to droop behind the trees, turning the sky into a patchwork of oranges and purples. She rested her head on my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager, too tired to pretend she didn't need her father. I could feel the tension in her finally ease, like she'd exhaled for the first time in weeks. "When Mom died, I think I tried to outrun the grief," she murmured. "I buried myself in work, in promotions, in proving I could be someone." "You already were someone," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You were our little girl, and that was enough." "Oh." We watched as the first stars blinked awake in the darkening sky. The swing swayed gently, rhythmically, as if rocking us back into place. Across the street, Mrs. Carmichael turned on her porch light. and we could hear her old radio playing something from the 60s. Familiar, comforting. Mia reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, taking it. "Something small," she said. "I figured if I can't give you a mansion, maybe I can give you something that fits in your world." Inside was a printout reservation for a fishing cabin we used to visit when she was a kid. 3 nights, just the 2 of us. "You remembered," I said, my voice catching. "I remember everything," she whispered. "I just forgot how much it mattered." I nodded, too choked up to reply. We didn't need to say more. That cabin meant burned marshmallows, card games by lamplight, and catching more stories than fish. It meant being together, uninterrupted, in a world that still believed in second chances. Later that night, after she went inside to sleep in her old room still untouched, still painted with the same lilac color she chose at 12, I stayed on the porch. I watched the stars fill the sky, each one a tiny promise. The house behind me breathed gently, filled again with the sounds of life. I could hear her unpacking, humming low, opening drawers she once closed with childish frustration. It felt like the world had circled back to something real, something pure. I sipped the last of my coffee, warm even in the cool air, and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt complete. Not because everything was fixed, but because we'd stopped pretending it had to be. Tomorrow we'd fix that loose railing together, maybe bake something, maybe just sit and let the porch talk for us. And maybe, just maybe, healing didn't need a palace. Sometimes, it just needed a swing that creaked and a silence that finally made sense. The morning air had that crisp, paper-thin coolness that comes just before spring gives way to summer. I stood in the backyard with a mug of coffee warming my hands, staring at the shed that leaned ever so slightly to one side like a tired man resting on an elbow. That shed had seen everything. The time Mia broke her wrist trying to climb its roof. The day I built her a swing set from scratch and swore louder than I should when the wrench slipped. And of course the night after her mother's funeral, when I sat inside with a bottle and her old blanket draped over my shoulders, trying to understand how time could be so cruel. Now it waited like a sleeping dog, flaking paint, cracked windows, and all. Mia joined me, rubbing her arms against the chill. She wore an old hoodie of mine, sleeves too long, hood barely covering her hair. "You gonna open it?" she asked. "Eventually," I said. "It's been locked a while." "Well," she said, nodding toward the tools in the wheelbarrow. "Looks like today's a good day for eventually." I smiled. We crossed the yard together, and I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing against the rusty key I hadn't used in years. The lock resisted at first, then gave with a loud click that startled a couple of birds from the trees nearby. I opened the door, and the scent of wood, oil, and memory spilled out like a sigh. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the dirty windows. The old workbench stood solidly against the back wall, cluttered with tools frozen mid-task, a jar of screws, half a carved wooden duck, paint cans stacked like forgotten soldiers. On one shelf sat a small jewelry box Mia had tried to make when she was 10 on hinge broken, the lid slightly warped. She picked it up and turned it in her hands. "I remember crying when this cracked," she said. "You told me it gave it character." "I lied," I chuckled. "But you believed me, and that made it true." We spent the next few hours cleaning. She swept the floor. I sorted through boxes. Every item had a story. The hammer with the chipped handle that built the bookshelves in her room. The red toolbox with the crooked latch. A gift from her grandfather, who never fixed anything in his life, but knew the value of preparation. By midday, we'd cleared enough space to move freely. We even opened the window, letting fresh air and the sound of birdsong pour in. It felt like we were brushing the dust off not just tools, but time itself. Then she found the folder. It was tucked behind a stack of old newspapers, thick with yellowed pages and curled edges. She pulled it out carefully and handed it to me. I sat down on the workbench stool, opened it, and found a pile of letters, some typed, most handwritten in my wife's delicate script. They were drafts, unsent messages, to me, to Mia, to herself. Mia stood behind me as I read the first one. It was dated 2 weeks before her surgery. In it, she talked about regretho. She wished she'd said more, done less of the worrying, more of the laughing. How proud she was of Mia, even when they argued, how scared she was to leave us behind. I didn't realize I was crying until a drop hit the paper. I wiped it away, smudging the ink. Mia kneeled beside me, resting her head against my shoulder. "I didn't know she wrote these," she whispered. "Neither did I said, voice breaking. We sat there, reading page after page. Some were angry, frustrated with time, with fate, with herself. Others were soft and full of yearning. One, addressed to Mia, said, "If your success ever feels hollow, it's because you left your roots behind. Go home, not to me, to him." Mia read that line aloud, and then we just sat, breathing in the scent of old paper and reconciliation. By evening, we'd finished going through them. We didn't say much afterward. What could we say? Grief doesn't demand words, it just asks for space, for silence thick enough to hold pain without spilling. We stepped outside into the fading light, the sky bruised purple and gold. I placed the folder gently on the kitchen table when we got in, beside the old sugar jar she always overfilled. Mia made tea, her hands slow and careful. We sat at the table, 2 steaming cups between us, no sound but the creak of the house settling. "She knew," Mia finally said. "She always knew," I answered. We looked at each other, really looked, not as father and daughter, not as giver and receiver, but as 2 people carrying the same invisible weight, finally ready to set it down. That night, before going to bed, Mia took the photo from her nightstand, the one of all 3 of us at the county fair, cotton candy smeared on our faces, sunburned and laughing. She placed it beside the letters, and in the stillness that followed, I realized something. We hadn't reopened a shed, we had reopened our hearts, and that, more than anything, meant we could begin again. The next morning, I awoke before the sun again, not out of habit but because my mind couldn't rest. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling where the plaster still bore a crack from the winter the pipes froze. Down the hall, I could hear Mia shifting in her bed, the mattress springs murmuring like a memory being stirred. I got up quietly, brewed coffee the way I liked it, strong, and just a little burnt hand stepped out onto the porch with the letter folder in hand. The air was still, heavy with dew, the street cloaked in that soft silence only early mornings know how to hold. I opened the folder and pulled out one letter I hadn't read aloud the day before. It was different. No date. Just one sentence on the outside. To be opened when the world feels too big. And for... I unfolded it slowly, the paper fragile like skin stretched over bone. Her handwriting danced across the page, uneven but unmistakably hers. "Tom, if you're reading this, you've either lost your way or found too much. Sometimes they feel the same. The thing is, you always looked at life like it owed you an explanation. But maybe all it ever owed you was a witness, someone to sit beside you and say, 'Yes, this happened. I saw it too. You were that for me. Be that for her. Let her be that for you now.'" My hands trembled as I folded it back. It was the kind of letter that lands like a whisper and echoes like thunder. I heard the porch door creak open behind me. Mia stepped out in her flannel pajama pants and one of my old Marine Corps sweatshirts. Her hair was a mess, and she had a pillow mark on her cheek, but I swear I'd never seen her look more like home. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head. "Coffee's hot." And ate. We sat in silence, sipping, watching the world stretch itself awake. After a while, she turned to me. "I've been thinking about the letters," she said, "and what they meant. I feel like we spent years pretending grief was something to manage, like bills or emails. But it's not. It's a language. And I never learned how to speak it." I looked at her, my daughter who had mastered boardrooms and deals and the art of appearing untouchable. "Well," I said, "maybe it's time we start writing in it." Later that morning, we went back into the shed, this time with a plan. Mia brought her laptop, but not to work. She opened a new document and titled it, "Letters We Never Sent." We decided we'd each write one every day, not to anyone in particular, just to get things out of our heads and into the world. A conversation with absence, a dialogue with ghosts. I started first. I wrote to her mother about the time we danced barefoot in the rain behind the grocery store because we were too broke for dinner, but too happy to care. Mia wrote to a little girl version of herself, apologizing for pushing so hard to grow up. We read them to each other that afternoon, and again that night. It became our new ritual. No judgment, no edits. Just raw, handwritten or typed truth. By the 4th day, We had a stack of pages bound with a ribbon Mia found in a drawer. "One day," she said, "we'll burn them, not to forget, but to let them go." That evening we took a walk around the block. The neighbors waved. Some even stopped to chat. Word had spread that I was back, and apparently, so was she. One older man, Mr. Douglas, whose wife had passed last summer, walked alongside us for a stretch, sharing stories about the war and about his grandson who'd recently come out as gay. "Took me a minute," he said, "but love is love, and I ain't getting any younger to be holding grudges." When we got back home, the mailbox held a letter addressed to Mia. No return address. She opened it slowly. Inside was a short note. "Saw you two walking. It's good to see healing. Don't forget to tell your story. People need it more than you think." No signature, just those words. We sat on the porch again that night, candles flickering on the railing, the scent of wax and honeysuckle curling into the air. "Do you think we're meant to do something with this?" she asked. "The letters, the stories, this comeback." I nodded. "Maybe, but not for applause. Just so someone else doesn't feel as lost when their world breaks." She leaned against me, and for the first time I could feel her breath sinking with mine. Slow, steady, like we had finally found a rhythm neither of us was chasing anymore. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up and wrote one more letter. This one was for her. "Mia, I see you now. Not the daughter I tried to protect, not the woman I struggled to understand, but the person, the soul, the fire and the fear. And I'm proud, not because you succeeded, but because you stayed, you came back, and in doing so, you brought me with you. Love, Dad." I left it on her nightstand. In the quiet that followed, I realized something else. These weren't just letters. They were bridges, and after years of drifting apart, we were finally building our way back home. The attic had always been off limits, not because it held anything dangerous, but because it held too much. Too many memories, too many boxes with names written in fading ink, too many emotions tucked between old coats and the scent of cedar. I hadn't stepped foot up there in nearly a decade. After her funeral, I went up once, looked around, and shut the door, as if closing it would keep the ache from seeping down into the rest of the house. But today, Mia wanted to go. "There's something about unfinished places," she said over breakfast, stirring cream into her coffee. "Like they wait for you to be ready." I knew what she meant. So after we cleared the dishes and folded the newspaper she still insisted on reading in print, we carried a flashlight and a box of gloves to the narrow stairs behind the pantry. The wooden steps groaned under our weight, announcing our return like a forgotten dog barking at familiar footsteps. The air was thick, musty, but not unbearable. Sunlight sliced through the slats of the gable window, illuminating dust motes that danced like silent witnesses. The insulation peeked from between the beams, and the floor creaked in that language addicts speak when time presses against memory. "Where do we start?" she whispered. "Where it hurts least," I replied. But we both knew there was no painless place to begin, so we started with the trunk, the old blue one with the brass corners. It had belonged to her mother. We opened it slowly, reverently. Inside were quilts she'd sewn, letters from her college days, a few Polaroids that had begun to fade but not enough to erase the joy in her smile. Mia picked up one and stared at it for a long time, her mother holding baby Mia, both wrapped in the same yellow blanket. "I don't remember this," she said, "but I feel it." There was a silence then, but not empty. Full, actually. Full of everything we didn't say but understood now. We moved on to boxes labeled Tom, Work, Mia, School, and one simply marked Dreams. That one we opened last. Inside were notebooks, sketch pads, and a small wooden box. Mia opened it and gasped. Inside were folded slips of paper, each one, a dream she'd written down as a child. Be a vet. Visit Paris. Buy Dad a house on a lake. She laughed softly. "I was so ambitious." "You still are," I said. "But now you measure dreams by different rulers." She smiled at that, and we spent the next hour reading through them, laughing at some, pausing over others. Then we found the tapes. Old VHS cassettes labeled with years instead of events. 1993, 1997, 2000. We brought them downstairs and hooked up the dusty VCR I'd kept out of nostalgia. The image flickered to life, grainy and soft, but unmistakable. Mia's third birthday party. Her mom holding the cake, me in the background fumbling with the camcorder. Her laugh rang out through the living room, a sound so innocent it made my chest ache. "She had your laugh," Mia said, "and your stubbornness. We watched tapes for hours, pausing only to grab snacks or wipe our eyes. One showed a Thanksgiving, where we all wore paper pilgrim hats. Another was just a quiet Sunday-us reading, her mother humming while making stew. Mundane, beautiful life." At one point, Mia turned to me, her voice thick. "I spent so long trying to move on from this house, but it's not just a place, it's a witness. Like Mom said, it holds the truth of who we were, and maybe even who we still are." I nodded. "And it waited for us. Never judged. Just waited." That night, after Mia went to bed, I went back up to the attic. I brought a notebook and a pen, Saturday cross-legged next to the trunk, and began to write not letters this time, but memories, details. Stories I didn't want lost when I was gone. Not because they were grand, but because they were real. The night Mia had chickenpox and I held her hand until she slept. The first time she beat me at chess and I pretended to let her win. The way her mother used to tap her ring on the counter when she was thinking. I wrote until my hand cramped and the ink began to fade. When I came back down, I placed the notebook beside the letter folder on the kitchen table. Mia had left me another note, written on a napkin. "Let's keep going. There's more to unearth." And she was right. Because grief is not a pit you fall into and climb out of. It's a path, and sometimes you walk it alone. But sometimes, if you're lucky, someone walks beside you and reminds you that every step forward is not betrayal, it's honor. Honor to the ones we loved, to the ones we lost, to the parts of ourselves we left behind but now find again. And maybe that attic wasn't just storage. Maybe it was sacred. A room where echoes were not just heard but answered, where the past whispered its blessings and the future bent slightly to make room for healing. That night, as the house settled around me like an old coat, I realized the real inheritance Mia had given me. Not the apartment, not the new life, but the permission to remember, and in remembering, to finally begin living again. It was a Tuesday when the knock came, not the kind of polite tap from a neighbor returning borrowed tools, but the steady, deliberate kind that makes your chest tighten before you even answer. I was in the garage, hands deep in a box of rusted nails and memories, when Mia called out from the front hall, "Dad, you might want to see this." I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked inside. The front door stood open, and on the porch stood two men in suits, not cheap ones either, tailored, pressed, and paired with expressions that said they weren't here to sell cookies. Mia held the door like a shield, her posture calm, but her eyes calculating. I joined her and gave the men a nod. "Can I help you?" I asked. The older one stepped forward. His badge flashed just enough for formality. "Mr. Thomas Harris." "That's me." "I'm Agent Lowell. This is Agent Crane. We're with the Department of Justice." I glanced at Mia. Her face remained unreadable. "What's this about?" "We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding your late wife, Rebecca Harris. May we come in?" The name hit like a cold gust. Mia stepped aside before I could answer. We led them to the living room, offered coffee they declined, and sat down on the same couch where Mia and I had watched our old family videos just days earlier. Agent Lowell spoke first. "Mr. Harris, your wife worked for a pharmaceutical research company before her illness, correct?" I nodded slowly. "She was a lead data analyst at Northbridge Biotech, left about 6 months before she passed. Were you aware of any internal investigations or whistleblower actions involving her work?" The question landed like a punch. I looked at Mia, who leaned forward, her voice sharp. "What exactly are you implying?" Agent Crane opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. It showed Rebecca at a lab desk, mid-conversation with a man I didn't recognize. This was taken 3 months before she resigned. The man next to her, Dr. Lance Miller, was recently indicted for falsifying drug efficacy reports tied to a now recalled medication. Your wife's name appears in several internal communications linked to that case. My stomach twisted. I hadn't heard that name in years, and suddenly the air in the room felt thin. "She never said anything," I muttered. She didn't tell me." Agent Lowell nodded as if he expected that. "Sometimes whistleblowers keep quiet to protect their families. We believe your wife may have tried to alert regulators and was subsequently pressured to leave, possibly threatened." Mia's jaw tightened. Why now? Why come to us? Because we recently received anonymous documentation scans of journals, handwritten notes. Some mention her suspicions. Some are in her handwriting. Others seem to be yours. My breath caught. Mine? Agent Crane slid another item across the table. A photocopy of one of the letters I'd found in the attic. This surfaced on an encrypted server flagged in an ongoing corporate fraud investigation. It references a secure backup drive that hasn't been located. We think you might have it. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My thoughts spun back to the attic, to a tin box we hadn't opened. I thought it held old tax forms or receipts. I never imagined it might contain evidence tied to my wife's final months. Mia stood. This is a lot. We need time. You can leave your contact info, but I'm going to ask you to go now. The agents didn't argue. They handed us a card, nodded, and left without another word. Once the door closed, silence settled like dust. I looked at Mia, her eyes dark with unspoken questions. Did you know? She asked. About any of this? No, I whispered. I thought she left the job because the stress was hurting her. I never pushed. I never asked the right questions. She crossed her arms. We need to find that drive. That afternoon, we returned to the attic. The tin box was buried beneath layers of files and old magazines. I opened it, and there it was, a small flash drive taped to the inside lid, labeled in her neat script, Backup, Personal. We brought it downstairs, plugged it into Mia's laptop, and watched as folders unfolded on the screen-scanned documents, internal emails, even voice memos labeled by date. One stood out. Final note, May 2. Mia clicked it. Her mother's voice filled the room, soft but resolute. If you're hearing this, then what I feared has happened. They silenced me. I knew the risks, but I couldn't stay quiet. Too many lives would be lost. I've sent what I could to the regulators, but if they got to me, they'll try to erase it. Tom, Mia, if you find this, finish what I started. Don't let them bury the truth. The room was still when the recording ended. I felt Mia's hand reach for mine. Her grip was steady, fierce. We're not letting her disappear, Dad. No, I said. We're going to raise her voice. In the days that followed, Mia used her legal contacts, calling in favors she hadn't used in years. I reached out to Rebecca's former colleague, the one who had always seemed nervous but loyal. We worked quietly, methodically. Each piece of data we uncovered became another brick in the path toward justice. Mia reached out to a journalist she trusted. We agreed to go public on our terms. As we sat together in the quiet of the living room, I glanced at the photo of our family on the wall. We were smiling, unaware of the storm that would follow. But now, we were ready. Not just to weather it, but to end it. This wasn't just our story anymore, it was hers, and through us, she would speak again. The night before the interview aired, I stood alone on the porch, watching the wind move through the trees like an unseen hand stirring old ghosts. The sky was deep navy, the kind of color that made the stars look like stitches in a fabric stretched too tight. In the kitchen behind me, Mia paced, rehearsing answers, scrolling through her notes, her eyes darting with the precision of someone who knew every second on camera mattered. We had decided together our story needed to be heard. Not the sanitized version, the real one. The one where love didn't always shield us from tragedy, but where truth still stood a chance. I turned as the screen door creaked open. Mia stepped out, arms crossed, holding a cup of tea she'd let grow cold. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Haven't really since Tuesday." "Same." She leaned beside me against the railing. "I keep thinking about what Mom said, that we were witnesses, that maybe that's enough." I looked at her, her face still beautiful in that grown, woman kind of way, defined not by perfection, but by all she had endured. "Sometimes being a witness is the bravest thing you can be," I said, "especially when you're the last one left to remember." The next morning, we drove to the station in silence. Not the heavy kind, just a quiet focus. The reporter, a woman named Rachel, greeted us warmly. She was in her early 50s, with streaks of silver in her hair and a handshake that meant business. "We'll go gentle," she said, "but honest, always honest." The cameras rolled, and Mia spoke first. She told them about her mother, not as a statistic, but as a woman who sang while doing dishes, who ran 5 miles every morning, who once wrote a 22-page letter to her senator about healthcare reform. Then she told them about the tapes, the letters, the attic, and finally about the drive. "My mother died before she could speak her truth," Mia said, her voice steady. "But silence is a choice. And today I choose not to be silent." I spoke next, not as a father, not even as a widower, but as a man who had spent too long thinking grief should be endured quietly. "Rebecca was the strongest person I ever knew," I said. "And when she saw something wrong, she didn't turn away, even when it cost her everything." Rachel nodded, and for a moment the studio went still. When the segment aired that night, it spread faster than we expected. Thousands of shares, comments, messages. Some were angry, most were grateful. Other whistleblowers came forward. 2 more employees from Northbridge confirmed parts of Rebecca's allegations. The Justice Department opened a formal inquiry, and the world began to tilt just slightly back toward truth. But the real change happened in the smallest ways. An old friend of Mia's wrote her a letter. "I left the company years ago," it read, "but I always wondered if staying quiet made me complicit. Your mother would be proud. A retired nurse sent me a package inside, was a quilt stitched with the initials RH, and a note. For the woman who reminded us all what courage looks like." Weeks passed, then months. The investigation deepened. Mia returned to her life in the city but called me every evening. We had dinner together over video calls, reading new letters we still wrote to Mom. The apartment she gave me, the one I once resisted, became a home filled with memories both old and new. I started a garden on the rooftop, herbs, tomatoes, a stubborn lemon tree that refused to bloom. One morning, Mia surprised me. She arrived unannounced, suitcase in hand, eyes tired but bright. "I'm taking a break," she said. "I want to stay a while." We didn't need to say more. She moved into the guest room, cooked Sunday breakfasts, argued about crossword puzzles, and slowly, the house began to hum with the rhythm of a life restored. Then came the letter, official DOJ seal, a statement that charges were being filed against several executives. The report would be made public. Rebecca's name appeared prominent, credited posthumously as the primary whistleblower. Mia cried when she read it, not from sadness, from relief. "She did it," she whispered. "She finally did it." That night, we held a small gathering. Just us, a few neighbors, and some friends from Rebecca's old life. We played her favorite records, poured glasses of the wine she loved, and told stories about her stubbornness, her humor, her fire. Someone asked if we ever regretted stirring up old wounds. I looked around the room, at Mia laughing with a woman who once opposed her in court, at the sun setting behind the garden we'd planted together, and I said, "Some wounds don't heal until they're seen." Later, after everyone had gone, Mia and I sat on the porch. The stars were out again, just as they'd been the night before it all began. "Do you ever think about what she'd say if she were here?" Mia asked. I nodded. "Every day." "Me too." She took a deep breath. "But now, I think I finally know." She'd say, "You found each other again. That's what matters." I looked at my daughter, this woman who had once felt so far from me, and I realized something simple, profound. We hadn't just honored Rebecca's memory. We had rebuilt something in the rubble she left behind. The story didn't end with justice. It began again with love. Love that took the long way home. Love that stumbled, broke, hid in silence, but eventually stood up and spoke, loud, clear, unafraid. And as the night grew still and the stars blinked overhead like old friends, I whispered one last letter into the dark, just for her. "Rebecca, you were right. Being a witness was enough. But telling the storytelling, your story made us whole again." It was on an overcast afternoon in early March, nearly a year after the day our lives cracked open, that I noticed the man in the corner booth. I had started frequenting this small diner off Main Street, the kind with worn leather seats, a jukebox stuck on old Sinatra, and waitresses who called you honey, whether they knew your name or not. I wasn't looking for company, just routine, something to fill the hours that stretched between Mia's visits and the occasional letters still trickling in from people who had watched our interview and seen themselves reflected in our grief. That day, I was nursing a second cup of black coffee when I noticed him, late 60s maybe, with a weathered face and the kind of posture that said he'd carried more than his share of burdens. He didn't look up when I entered. just kept turning his cup slowly on the saucer like he was trying to rewind time. I wouldn't have paid him any more attention, but something about him pulled at a thread I didn't know was loose. He looked like someone who knew too much and had told too little. That was a look I knew well. After a few visits, I noticed he was always there on Tuesdays. Same booth, same routine. The waitresses didn't chat him up. He didn't order food, just coffee, no cream. I asked Susan, the regular server, if she knew him. "That's Leonard," she said, topping off my cup. "Comes in same time every week, barely says a word, been doing it for years. Lost his son to a bad batch of something that company out in Riverdale used to make. Lawsuit got buried, folks forgot. But he still shows up, like clockwork." I felt something shift in my chest. "Riverdale?" I asked. "Northbridge Biotech?" "That's the one," she said with a sad nod. "Heard your story, saw you on television. Said it was the first time he didn't feel crazy in a long time." I didn't approach him that day, or the next. But the following Tuesday I sat down across from him without asking. He didn't look surprised, just nodded like he'd been waiting for someone to take that seat. "Tom Harris," I said, extending my hand. "Rebecca's husband." His grip was firm, eyes unreadable. "Leonard Price. John was my boy, 19, bright as hell. Took that trial med after a football injury. Never woke up." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." "Me too," he said. "But sorry, don't bring him back." We talked in short bursts, the way men do when the weight is too great for long speeches. He told me about the settlement they offered, quiet money, no admittance of fault, the way his wife couldn't bear to stay in the house after John passed, the silence that grew so thick between them they couldn't breathe. Eventually she left, and he stayed, at that booth, every Tuesday. At first, I thought maybe if someone saw me here, someone from the company, they'd feel something, guilt, shame, anything. He shrugged. But mostly, I just didn't know where else to go. I told him about Rebecca, about the attic, the flash drive, the voice recording we still hadn't stopped playing every Sunday morning. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Your wife was brave, braver than most of us." I nodded. "She carried it alone, too long." He looked at me with something like understanding. "But you picked it up." "Yeah," I said quietly, "because it didn't belong to her alone." From then on, we made it a habit. Tuesdays became our day. We'd sit in the booth, drink coffee, swap pieces of our shattered pasts, and slowly, without meaning to, build something that felt like peace. Mia came by one day and met Leonard. She hugged him without hesitation. "You're part of the story too," she told him. He smiled for the first time I'd seen, eyes glistening. "Your mama would be proud," he said, "of both of you." It was Mia who pushed for the Idea Foundation in Rebecca's name, something small at first, scholarships for students studying ethics in medical research, grants for investigative journalists exposing pharmaceutical fraud. Leonard was the first to donate. "For John," he said, "we called it the Quiet Witness Fund, because that's what so many of us had been. Witnesses, silenced by fear, grief, shame. Now we would speak." The fund grew slowly, then faster. A national paper did a feature. A university offered to partner. And one day, I stood at a podium at a small community college in Ohio, looking out over a room full of students, activists, and families who had all carried something too heavy, too long. "We're here today because truth matters," I told them. "Because silence doesn't protect us, it just protects the wrong people." In the back row, I saw Leonard nod, his hands folded, his presence steady as ever. That night, I sat with Mia on the rooftop garden. The lemon tree still hadn't bloomed, but the basil was thriving, and the tomatoes hung heavy and red. "I didn't know I could be this person," she said. "Neither did I replied. "But then again, I didn't know grief could make you grow." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a while we didn't speak. We just watched the city lights flicker below us, listened to the hum of a world that had somehow kept turning, even when ours had stopped. And I realized something profound. Not all justice comes in courtroom. Sometimes it comes in coffee booths and scholarships, in quiet conversations and stubborn trees, in showing up, week after week, until the silence is filled with purpose. As the wind picked up and the stars began to peek through the cloud cover, I whispered a small prayer, not of religion, but of gratitude. For Rebecca, for Mia, For Leonard. For every quiet witness who had finally found their voice, and for the chance, however late, to be part of something that mattered, something true. The following weeks passed with a curious calm, like the eye of a storm had settled over our lives. The press had quieted, the fund was steadily growing, and Mia had found a new rhythm, working part-time as a consultant while dedicating the rest to the foundation. Every morning, I would find her at the kitchen table, hair tied in a loose bun, poring over emails, budgets, and testimonials from people across the country. "Another letter," she'd say, holding up an envelope. "This one's from a nurse in Wisconsin. Says she watched our interview and quit her job after realizing her hospital was covering up dosage reports." And we'd sit together, reading it aloud, marveling at how one voice, Rebecca's voice, had stirred so many others. One morning, just as the first signs of spring softened the air, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a worn leather notebook, the pages filled with neat handwriting. At the bottom of the cover was a name, D. Henley. I opened it, puzzled, then froze as I recognized the first line. Rebecca was the only one who ever questioned the numbers. I read on, each page revealing a story, a confession. Daniel Henley had been a junior analyst at Northbridge, too afraid to speak up, too green to grasp the magnitude of what he'd stumbled upon. He'd known about the altered reports. He'd seen Rebecca's warning emails, and he'd done nothing, until now. "This notebook is my reckoning," he wrote. "If you're reading this, it means I've finally found enough courage to pass the truth forward." I brought it to Mia, her eyes scanning page after page in silence. "We need to get this to the DOJ," she said, her voice tight with urgency. But something in her expression stopped me. "You okay?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "It's just reading his words, the guilt, the way he describes Mom like a lighthouse in a storm. I didn't know she had that effect on people, strangers even." "She had that effect on everyone," I said, "especially the ones who needed it most." The notebook reignited the investigation. It filled in gaps, confirmed timelines, exposed a second set of books we hadn't known existed. The DOJ reopened several lines of inquiry, and suddenly the silence we'd been living in shattered into noise calls, subpoenas, interviews, and with it came a new wave of scrutiny. Some said we were after money, others questioned our motives, but we held our ground. Because truth, once set loose, refuses to be silenced. Mia began traveling more, giving talks, meeting with lawmakers, expanding the reach of the foundation. I stayed back, holding down our little sanctuary. At night, we'd talk on the phone, sometimes for hours. One evening, as she sat in a hotel room in D.C., she said something that caught me off guard. "Dad, do you think Mom knew how all this would unfold?" I paused, letting the silence stretch. "No," I said finally. "I think she just hoped someone would care enough to finish what she started." In the midst of it all, Leonard fell ill. Pneumonia, the doctor said. He was admitted to the small hospital just outside town, and I visited every day. We didn't talk much, just sat, sometimes watching old baseball games, sometimes just breathing in the same space. One afternoon, as the rain tapped against the window pane, he turned to me and said, "You ever wonder if all this noise is worth it? The stories, the pain, the dragging it all out again?" I thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," I admitted. "Sometimes, but then I remember John, Rebecca, and I figure, if our noise drowns out even one more lie, then maybe it's enough." He nodded, then handed me a folded piece of paper. "For when I'm gone, don't open it till then." I took it, heart tightening, knowing what it meant. Leonard passed 3 days later, quietly, without fuss. I read his note that night, sitting on the rooftop with the stars blinking back tears. "Thanks for seeing me," it read. "Tell Mia she's got her mother's fire. And Tom, keep showing up, even when it's hard. That's what makes you the right kind of dangerous." His funeral was small. Mia flew in. We spoke briefly, then just stood in silence as Leonard's ashes were scattered near a lake he once loved. And I realized then we weren't just witnesses anymore. We were the keepers of legacies, of names that would otherwise be forgotten. Later that evening, back at home, Mia brought out an old photo album. Inside were pictures of Rebecca from her early career smiling, arms crossed, the kind of stance that dared you to underestimate her. "She was younger than me in this one," Mia whispered. How did she get so strong, so young? I looked at the image and smiled. She wasn't born strong, honey. She chose it, every day. And now, so do we. The chapter of public battles was far from over. There would be hearings, lawsuits, people trying to discredit us. But the foundation stood, the voices multiplied, and the truth, once cracked open, poured through the cracks like light through an old church window, unrelenting, sacred, and impossible to ignore. As Mia packed for her next trip, she paused at the door. Do you think Mom would have done it differently? I walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder. I think she'd be standing right beside you, with her sleeves rolled up, ready for the next round. That night, as the city hummed beneath us, I wrote my final entry in the leather notebook Leonard had given me. Justice isn't loud, I wrote. It's the steady drip of truth carving through stone. It's a Tuesday booth, a trembling voice, a daughter who won't let go, a man who keeps showing up, and a woman long gone, but never silent, whose echo still shakes the world. Spring edged into summer with the kind of slow certainty that made you believe in second chances. The garden on the rooftop flourished beyond our expectations, basil now tall as a child's knee, tomatoes ripening in deep crimson clusters, and the lemon tree finally showing timid blossoms that Mia insisted were signs from Mom. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Sometimes belief is the only thing keeping you upright. That morning, I found myself back at the Courthouseano as a plaintiff, not as a witness, but as a guest. They had invited Mia to speak at a public hearing on corporate ethics reform. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very institution that once ignored us was now handing her a microphone and asking her to lead the way. She stood tall behind the polished wood lectern, her blazer sharp, her voice steady, and she began with a single sentence that dropped like a stone into the stillness. My name is Mia Harris, and I am the daughter of a woman who died telling the truth. The room went quiet, reverent. You could hear pens stilling on notepads. My mother, Rebecca Harris, was not a martyr. She was a scientist, a mother, a wife, and she believed, stubbornly, that facts should matter more than profits. I watched as she moved through her testimony, clear, impassioned, relentless. She read excerpts from Daniel Henley's journal, detailed the fake trials, the discarded warnings, the lives lost, all while holding the silence like it was a sacred thing. When she finished, the room didn't erupt into applause. It sat stunned, eyes blinking, some tearful. That silence said more than clapping ever could. Afterward, she came to where I stood in the hallway, her hands trembling slightly. Was it enough? She asked. I wrapped my arms around her. More than enough, I said. You were your mother's voice. You brought her back to life. We stepped outside, the sun high and sharp, and for the first time in months, I saw her shoulders relax. Not from relief, but from release. Like she'd finally exhaled the grief that had sat on her chest since that rainy morning a year ago. The world didn't change overnight, but things moved. Policy drafts circulated, investigations reopened, and across the country, emails flooded our inbox with lines like, "Because of you, I spoke up," and "My daughter deserved better, thank you for not letting them bury her." At home, I returned to my old habit of walking after dinner. Our neighborhood, once just backdrop, had become something else entirely. Each porch light reminded me of Leonard, every open window a ghost of stories I'd never hear but understood all the same. One evening, as twilight painted the buildings gold, I passed by the church Rebecca and I used to attend in our early years. A banner now hung on its front gates. Truth is not an inconvenience, it's a calling. I didn't know who put it there. Maybe someone who had heard Mia speak. Maybe someone who simply remembered. Either way, I stood before it a long time, hands in pockets, heart heavy in the best possible way. Back home, I found an envelope on the kitchen counter. Mia had left for New York that morning, meeting with a documentary team working on a feature about the Quiet Witness Fund. The envelope was addressed in tight, angular handwriting. Inside was a simple note. You may not know me, but I knew Rebecca. She saved my daughter's life when no one else would listen. I've carried that gratitude for 12 years. Please accept this gift. It was signed only Grateful Father, and tucked inside was a check. $50,000. Untraceable, undemanding, just gratitude in its purest, most anonymous form. I sat at the kitchen table for hours after that, the check in front of me, wondering at the ripple effects of courage. How a single act of defiance, done quietly and without promise of reward, could echo for over a decade and still touch hearts unseen. In the days that followed, I returned to the attic. It had remained untouched since we unearthed the flash drive, but now I felt drawn to it again. Dust particles danced in the afternoon light as I opened the old chest where Rebecca had kept her journals. There, nestled beneath yellowing pages, was a small cassette tape labeled in her handwriting, "For Mia when she's ready." I brought it downstairs, heart pounding. I didn't play it, not yet. It wasn't my moment, it was hers. I called her that night, told her what I'd found. There was a long pause, then she whispered, "Keep it safe, I'll come home next week." That Sunday, I sat in Leonard's old booth, coffee in hand, eyes tracing the scuff marks on the table. The diner was quieter than usual. The jukebox played something soft, almost forgotten, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what healing really meant. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with banners or announcements. It came like this in small, sturdy moments, in silent booths, in anonymous envelopes, in the steady voice of a daughter standing where her mother had once been broken. When I returned home, I opened the rooftop door. The lemon tree had bloomed fully, fragrant and defiant. I stood beneath it, eyes closed, and felt the breeze stir the petals like they were whispering something just out of reach. Later that evening, I sat at my desk and began writing again. Not for justice, not for the news, just for me. A letter to Rebecca. "You were right," I wrote. "Not about the science, though you were always right there too, but about the way truth lives on, long after the people who carried it are gone. It takes root, it finds new voices, and sometimes, against all odds, it blooms." I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer beside her last journal, and turned off the lamp. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware of the small victories that had changed everything. And somewhere, I believed, Rebecca was watching, not as a ghost, but as a force quiet, resilient, and still speaking through us. The day Mia returned was unremarkable in weather-gray skies, light drizzle, the kind that hung in the air without falling. She came in quietly, wheeling a small suitcase and wearing that same tan coat Rebecca used to favor when the season shifted. I watched from the doorway as she stood in the living room, eyes sweeping over the furniture, the plants, the shelves, like she was measuring how time had changed everything. "Smells like rosemary and dust," she said softly. I smiled. "That's my cologne these days." She laughed, but it was tight. Her fingers found the back of a chair, gripping it like a lifeline. "Is it still where you said?" "Top drawer, wrapped in the old linen napkin." We didn't say much after that. I made tea. She disappeared into her room for a bit. When she came out, she was holding the tape. Her eyes didn't leave it once. We sat in the kitchen. The old cassette player Leonard had once gifted us sitting in the center like an altar. She pressed play. At first, just static. Then her voice, Rebecca's voice, soft, tentative, then stronger. "Mia, honey, if you're hearing this, I guess that means I didn't get to tell you everything. And I hate that. I hate leaving without finishing the story." Her voice cracked there, just slightly, and I saw Mia's hand tighten around her mug. "I want you to know that I never meant to be a hero. I just couldn't look away. The numbers didn't make sense. The trials weren't matching the reports. And when I asked questions, well, you know how that went." A long pause followed, filled with soft breathing. "But this isn't about the case. Not really. It's about you. About the woman I hoped you'd grow into. Strong, yes, but kind. Loud when needed, silent when grace is better. And brave enough to lose everything, if that's what truth asks of you." I felt my breath catch in my throat. Mia didn't blink. She stared at the cassette like it was a flame she couldn't pull away from. "I wish I had more time," the voice continued. "To show you how to cook lasagna the way your grandmother taught me. To walk with you through heartbreak. To see the woman you'd become. But if I can't do those things, then let me leave you this instead. Never let fear decide who you become. Never let someone else define your worth. And never, ever believe that silence is safer than honesty." There was a final rustle, a quiet sigh. "I love you, always, in every version of the future." The tape clicked off. The kitchen fell into a hush that no amount of wind or rain could breach. Mia didn't move. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She sat perfectly still, like if she breathed too hard the moment would vanish. I reached across the table and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Later that evening, after dinner and after silence had laid its blanket again over the house, she spoke. That wasn't just a message, it was a map. I nodded. She knew you'd need it. Not just the words, the permission. To be angry? To be whole, I said. She didn't respond right away. Just stared out the window where dusk had crept in. I keep thinking about all the daughters out there, she said eventually, whose mothers weren't as brave or weren't believed. What happens to them? I thought for a long while. Maybe they find people like you. Maybe your voice becomes what theirs never had. She leaned back, her face unreadable. That's a heavy thing to carry. It is, I said, but it fits you. That weekend, she asked if we could go visit the old research facility, the one Rebecca used to work at. It had long since shut down, boarded up and forgotten, but still standing like a monument to broken systems. We drove in silence, passing through towns that seemed stuck in amber. When we arrived, the gate was rusted, the sign barely legible. I used to sit in the back seat, Mia said, stepping out, reading comic books while Mom ran late meetings. The gravel crunched under our feet as we made our way to the front steps. She knelt down, touching the cold concrete. This place swallowed her, she said. And now it's just dust. I didn't have a reply. What could I say that would ease that truth? As we turned to leave, a car pulled up. A young woman stepped out, maybe in her 30s, clipboard in hand. You folks here for the memorial project? She asked. Mia blinked. Memorial? Yeah, the woman said. Some non-profits funding a conversion, making this place into a community center, in honor of, hang on. She checked her notes. Rebecca Harris, you related? Mia swallowed hard. She was my mother. The woman's face lit with recognition. Oh, wow, we've been using her story in the promotional materials. She's why this is happening. Her courage had started all of this. Mia looked like someone had punched the wind out of her. I stepped forward. She just wanted to tell the truth, I said. The woman nodded. Well, sometimes that's the bravest thing there is. We left not long after, the road stretching out before us like a promise. That night, Mia couldn't sleep. I heard her pacing, heard the soft creak of floorboards under her feet. Eventually, she came into my room. Can I sleep here tonight? She asked. Like she was 5 again, afraid of the thunder. I nodded, moving over. She curled up beside me, her head on my shoulder. She really did come back to us, didn't she? She murmured. I didn't answer. I just placed my hand over hers, felt the warmth, the steady rhythm, the legacy beating beneath our skin. And for the first time since the morning the rain came, I believed we might actually be okay. Not untouched, not healed, but okay in the way that meant we'd survive, together. With her voice still echoing through us, whispering us forward. The morning after Mia curled beside me like she used to when the world was too much, we awoke to a storm. Not rain, not thunder this. Was the kind that moved in with silence and stayed like a heavy fog. It pressed against the windows and made the whole world feel smaller, more intimate, as though something sacred were about to happen. Mia made coffee. She didn't speak much. Just moved through the kitchen like she was memorizing I teach drawer handle, each cupboard creak. I knew that look. It was the look Rebecca had the week before she turned in her resignation letter when she knew something was about to shift and she wanted to etch everything before it vanished. I got a call, she finally said, from DC. They want me to testify again, but this time it's not a hearing, it's a criminal trial. I froze mid-sip. Against Henley? Against the board, 5 of them. Conspiracy, falsified documents, negligent homicide. She said it like she didn't believe her own voice. I set the cup down. You're going to do it? She nodded slowly. I have to. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Lawyers, advisors, publicists. They all spoke quickly, handing her folders, staging practice questions, warning her about cross-examinations. Mia remained calm, but I could see the strain. At night, she didn't pace. She sat at Rebecca's old desk, thumbing through her mother's journals like she was studying for an exam that could rewrite history. One night, I found her tracing a single line over and over again. It read, "If the truth costs me my name, let it buy someone else's freedom." Mia looked up and said, she wasn't just brave, she was prophetic. I didn't know what to say to that. So I did the only thing I could. I stayed close. I kept the house warm, the meals hot, and the silence gentle. The morning she left for DC, she wore Rebecca's scarf. It was pale blue, fraying at the edges. I remember buying it from a street vendor when Rebecca and I were young and poor and full of impossible plans. "You know," I said, adjusting it around Mia's neck, "your mom used to call this her storm ribbon. Said it kept her anchored when she was scared." Mia smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'll need it." At the airport, she hugged me longer than usual. No words, just that deep, silent grip that said everything. And then she was gone, swallowed by escalators and security lines. The house felt different without her. Too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I went up to the rooftop, sat by the lemon tree, and stared out over the city. Somewhere out there, my daughter was walking into a courtroom full of wolves. But she wasn't prey. She was stormborn. She had her mother's fire and my stubbornness. She had her own voice now, sharpened by grief, steadied by purpose. That night, I turned on the news. Her face filled the screen, flanked by reporters and cameras. She didn't blink under the flashes. She just walked. Inside the courtroom, she spoke with the same clarity that had stunned the ethics committee weeks earlier. "My mother warned them," she said. "She gave them every opportunity to change course. They silenced her instead. The defense lawyers tried to twist her words, accused her of exploiting her mother's death. But Mia never flinched. 'This isn't about vengeance,' she replied. 'It's about accountability, about ensuring no one else dies because truth was inconvenient.' When the trial recessed for lunch, she stepped outside. Cameras swarmed her. One reporter asked, 'Do you think this will change anything?' Mia looked directly into the lens and said, 'It already has. We're talking, aren't we?' The trial lasted 2 weeks. During that time, I fielded dozens of calls, some from strangers, some from people I hadn't heard from in decades. One old friend from college left a voicemail that simply said, 'Your daughter makes us believe again.' On the day of closing arguments, I flew out to DC. I sat quietly in the back row, my hands clenched, my heart pounding like a war drum. The prosecution laid out every falsified trial, every bribed official, every ignored warning. Then came Mia's final words. She didn't speak as a daughter, she spoke as a citizen. "We entrust our lives to institutions built on trust," she said. "When that trust is broken, we don't collapse. We rise. We rise because we have to, because someone has to." The jury deliberated for hours that felt like days. When the verdict finally came guilty on all counts, Mia didn't cry. She closed her eyes, took one long breath, and whispered something I couldn't hear but knew was for Rebecca. Outside the courthouse, people had gathered. Some held signs with Rebecca's name. Some just stood in quiet solidarity. Mia stepped to the podium and said, "This victory is not just for my mother. It's for every silenced voice, every whistle blown into a void. You were heard, finally." That night, in our hotel room, she handed me the storm ribbon. "You should keep it now," she said. "No," I replied, tying it gently around her wrist. "It belongs to the storm." And as we stood there, the world felt wide again, not safe, but honest, and that was enough. Returning home felt different this time. Not just for Mia, but for the house, for the walls, for the floorboards that had once echoed only our grief. Now they seemed to hum with something else, pride, perhaps, or relief. Maybe just the peace that comes after a long storm finally breaks. As we pulled into the driveway, the wind tugged at Rebecca's old chime hanging above the porch. It rang out clearly, like a voice saying, "I see you." Mia stepped out first, holding her coat tight against the chill. She looked up at the sky, at the house, then turned to me with a softness in her expression I hadn't seen in years. "We brought her home," she whispered. Inside, everything looked the same, and yet nothing did. Her suitcase landed beside the hall table. I placed my keys in the same dish as always, but there was a stillness now that didn't ache. It rested gently around us, like a memory that no longer wounded but warmed. That evening, we ate in silence at the table. Halfway through dinner, Mia said, "Do you think Mom knew it would end like this?" I thought for a while. She didn't expect justice, she just hoped for it. Mia nodded. "I think hope is what kept her going." I smiled faintly. "It's what keeps us all going." In the days that followed, the world didn't suddenly become better. There were still calls from journalists, still online debates and angry letters from people who thought exposing the truth meant disloyalty. But there were also thank you notes, letters from widows, from families who had lost loved ones due to the lies her mother uncovered. "Because of your mother," one woman wrote, "my brother didn't die in vain." These letters became a quiet anchor. Mia printed them out, folded them into a scrapbook. She titled it Echoes. I watched her late at night, sitting at the table, gently smoothing each page like it was sacred scripture. One afternoon, she asked, "Would it be strange if I wanted to go back to teaching?" "Strange," I said. "It would be exactly right." She smiled. It's where she found her voice. Maybe I'll find mine there again too. She applied to several universities. The offers came quickly. But she chose a modest one, a local college, the same place Rebecca once gave a guest lecture years ago. I remembered sitting in the back row, watching her mother captivate a room with nothing but a whiteboard and a piece of chalk. Now, Mia would be walking those same halls, not as a legacy, but as a light in her own right. A few weeks later, she began teaching. Her class was called Ethics in Crisis. Fitting. She came home after the first day, exhausted and glowing. I asked them what they thought justice meant, she said, kicking off her shoes. They didn't know, but they wanted to. That night, I stood in the hallway, listening as she practiced her next lecture aloud. Her voice was firm, measured, and when she said the word truth, it landed like a promise. One morning, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. Mia opened it slowly, reading the first lines out loud. "To the daughter of a woman I tried to ruin," she stopped, looked at me, then kept reading. "I was on that board. I voted to silence her. I believed the lies we told ourselves that it was for the greater good, that questioning would bring collapse. But watching you speak, watching you carry her name into that courtroom, I realized the collapse was already happening, and we caused it. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed you to know that she changed me. Even in death, she changed me." Mia folded the letter quietly. "That's the one," she said. "That's the letter I'll keep in my desk." I understood. Not because it absolved anything, but because it meant her mother's voice had rippled into places even bitterness couldn't block. Spring came slowly that year, one bloom at a time. I planted herbs in the backyard again, like Rebecca used to. Mia helped me weed, laughed when she found her old toy car buried beneath the soil. "I thought I lost this during a tantrum," she said. I nodded. "You threw it when we said no more candy before dinner." She laughed, then sobered. She would have loved this, the normalcy. I looked around. "She's in it, Mia, all of it. You, me, this house. The truth. That's her fingerprint." That weekend, the community center held its ribbon-cutting ceremony. The former research facility had been transformed where once there were sterile labs and locked doors. Now there were bookshelves, classrooms, a mural of Rebecca on the north wall. Her face, painted in hues of gold and violet, looked out over a reading corner for children. Mia stood in front of the crowd, her hand trembling slightly. "My mother believed in questions," she said. "She believed they could save lives, build bridges, heal pain. This center is for every question silenced, and every voice waiting to rise." After the ceremony, an older woman approached us. She wore a pink cardigan and glasses too large for her face. "Your mother tutored my son once," she told Mia. "He was struggling in math. She made him believe he was a genius. Now he's teaching in Oregon. Thank you for bringing her back to us." Mia hugged her, no words, just the embrace of legacy passed from one hand to another. That night, we sat by the fire pit. No ceremony, no media, just us. The stars blinked quietly overhead. Mia sipped her tea and said, "Do you think she would be proud?" I looked at her, this woman who had been forged in loss and rose in strength. "She'd be awed, Mia. The world is better because you didn't stay silent." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Then maybe that's enough." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it truly was. The weeks that followed the ribbon cutting were quieter, not empty but steady, like the slow return of breath after a long-held silence. Mia's lectures continued to draw attention, not just for her eloquence, but for the raw honesty she wove into every lesson. Her students wrote essays filled with purpose, challenged one another with respectful fire, and lingered long after class ended to ask questions about justice, fear, and consequence. One evening, she brought home a note from a student named Keisha. It read, "Your mother lit the match. You're keeping the candle from going out." Mia didn't say anything. She just set the note on the mantel beside Rebecca's photo and stood there for a long time. I think that was when I realized the weight Mia carried was no longer just grief, it had become a form of stewardship. Spring turned to early summer, and the house, once a museum of mourning, began to move again with life. Neighbors dropped by more often. Mia organized a small book club for retired teachers. I even agreed to teach a weekend woodworking class at the community center, dusting off tools I hadn't touched in years. The laughter returned slowly, shy at first, like a song forgotten, then half remembered. One afternoon, I found Mia in the attic, sorting through old boxes. She held up Rebecca's old piano books and smiled. "She never taught me to play," she said, brushing dust from the cover, "but she'd sing while flipping pages, like her fingers were dancing with ghosts." I carried down the bench, she carried the books, and by dusk, the piano had returned to the living room, out of tune. A bit wobbly, but ours again. Around that time, a small article appeared in the Times, "The Daughter Who Wouldn't Let the Silence Win." It chronicled Mia's journey, the trial, the aftermath. There was a line that caught my breath. "Sometimes it is not the hammer that breaks the wall, but the persistent whisper that says, 'This is wrong. We didn't speak about it, but the article brought new visitors.' Some just wanted to thank Mia. Others came with burdened stories of injustices buried, of voices ignored. She listened to all of them. One woman, with tremors in her hands and a softness in her eyes, said, 'I watched your testimony with my daughter. She asked me, why did they try to stop her? I didn't have an answer. But now I tell her, because truth makes cowards afraid.' It was during this time that the foundation invited Mia to speak at a national ethics summit in Chicago. At first, she hesitated. 'It feels too big,' she confessed one night, 'like they want to make me into something I'm not.' I nodded. 'Then remind them who you are, not a martyr, not a mascot, just a woman who refused to forget.' She agreed. At the summit, she wore a simple gray dress, a silver pendant Rebecca once gave her. Her speech wasn't long, but it carried the hush of reverence. She spoke of memory, of responsibility, of the price of silence. 'Truth,' she said, 'is not a finish line, it's a candle, and if we pass it hand to hand, it can outlast the wind.' Oh, afterward, one of the attendees, a judge from Oregon, approached her. 'Your mother's research saved lives,' he said, 'but your courage, your persistence, that's saving something deeper, trust.' Mia smiled politely, but later, in the hotel room, she whispered to me. I never knew how loud her footsteps were until I had to walk in them. I squeezed her hand. 'And you didn't flinch.' Back home, the days stretched golden and long. Mia began mentoring a few students individually. One of them, a boy named Javier, reminded her of herself, fierce, brilliant, and scarred. He'd lost a parent to a system that turned away. Mia didn't try to fix him. She simply showed up every week, on time, with books, stories, sometimes just silence. One evening, he gave her a drawing. It showed a woman standing in the middle of a storm, holding a candle that wouldn't go out. He didn't sign it, just handed it to her and left. She framed it. And yet, amidst all this growth, there was still pain. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find Mia staring out the window, her fingers absently tracing the ribbon on her wrist. I knew the signs. The weight of legacy never leaves fully, it just shifts. One night she asked, "Do you ever wish she'd walked away from all of it?" I answered carefully, "Sometimes. But then I remember she wouldn't have been Rebecca if she did." Mia nodded. "I think I'm only now understanding how brave she was. How lonely it must have felt. You made sure she didn't stay forgotten," I said, "and that matters." A week later, we received an invitation to a memorial event hosted by a coalition of whistleblowers and ethics advocates. They were unveiling a new award, the Rebecca Morgan Honor for Ethical Bravery. Mia stood frozen when she read the name. "They're naming it after her," she whispered. "Her name, it's not just a cautionary tale anymore." At the ceremony, they asked Mia to present the first award. She stood before a crowd of strangers and said, "My mother didn't live to see the impact she made." But maybe that's the lesson: impact isn't measured by applause. It's measured by the change you never get to witness, but make possible. That night, as we walked to the car, I looked up at the sky. The stars were dimmed by the city lights, but one seemed to pulse a little brighter. Mia followed my gaze. "You think she's proud?" I didn't answer. I just smiled and let the silence say what words never could. We drove home through streets that now felt familiar again, not because they were safe, but because we had faced what lived in their shadows and lived. And though the candle flickered, it had not gone out, not yet, not ever. The days after the ceremony passed with a strange stillness, not empty or cold, but sacred, as if time itself had paused to breathe with us. Mia didn't rush back into her schedule. She took long walks in the morning, made breakfast at a slower pace, and lingered over books she used to flip through without focus. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the porch, a steaming mug in hand, eyes distant. "Do you remember when Mom used to knit out here?" she asked, barely above a whisper. I nodded. She never finished anything, just unraveled and restarted over and over. Mia smiled faintly. Maybe it wasn't about finishing. That thought seemed to settle something deep inside her. The idea that legacy wasn't measured in conclusions but in continual motion and choosing again and again to try, to speak, to stand. That week, an envelope arrived with the return address from the university. Inside was a proposal for a full professorship tenured with a funded research program. Mia stared at the letter, her expression unreadable. "They want me to build a program around ethical leadership," she said, "to design it from the ground up." I waited, letting her fill the silence on her own. After a moment, she added, "They want to call it the Morgan Initiative." I saw her flinch slightly when she said the name. "They want to turn her into a brand," she said. "A symbol." I touched her hand. Symbols aren't always prisons. Sometimes they're seeds. It depends on who plants them. She exhaled slowly, considering. "Then maybe I'll plant carefully." She accepted. And with that decision came a new rhythm. Meetings, planning sessions, calls with alumni and board members. Mia moved through it all with a quiet certainty. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore, just to build something that could outlive her. She brought in former whistleblowers to speak. She invited students to help shape the curriculum. One day she came home and said, "I assigned a project called What Truth Costs." They're terrified, and that's good. They should be. I asked her what her students thought truth cost her. She didn't answer at first, then said, "It cost me the version of myself that didn't ask questions." I nodded. That's a price worth paying. As the program took shape, other offers rolled in: speaking engagements, book deals, panel discussions. But Mia turned most of them down. "I'm not chasing platforms," she said. "I'm building one." One evening, we attended a local town hall. A small group had gathered to discuss ethics in municipal governance, and someone invited Mia to share her story. It wasn't a glamorous event, no cameras, no stage lights, just folding chairs and lukewarm coffee. But when Mia spoke, the room changed. Not because her story was new, but because her truth had grown roots in places no one expected. An older man approached us afterward, tears in his eyes. "My son died in that trial your mother exposed," he said. "But tonight I felt like his story didn't end in silence." Mia hugged him gently. "It never did. You just hadn't heard the rest yet." Back home, the house began to feel almost weightless, as if its walls had exhaled with us. I noticed Mia humming again when she cooked. She planted wildflowers along the backyard fence. One Saturday, she spent hours fixing a broken rocking chair Rebecca had refused to throw out. When I asked her why, she said, "Some things are worth mending even if no one sits in them anymore." That night, I sat in that very chair, watching the wind dance through the wildflowers, and I understood some acts of care are simply for the soul. Then came a letter that surprised us both. It was from the Department of Justice. They wanted Mia to serve on a special ethics advisory board that would review whistleblower protections and propose reforms. "They're asking me to fix what broke us," she said. I saw the conflict in her eyes, not fear, but reverence. "If I say yes, I'll be sitting across from the same kind of people who once let her fall." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you'll be reminding them what it looks like when someone refuses to let a system swallow the truth." She stared at the ceiling for a long time that night before finally whispering, "Okay, let's do it." And so, she did. It wasn't dramatic. It was detailed, tedious. 1,000 small changes, pushed one paper at a time. But she showed up, every meeting, every vote. One of the board members told her, "You argue like someone who lost something that can't be returned." Mia replied, "I did. That's why I won't let you forget what it cost." One evening, as summer faded, she and I sat under the porch light. The chime above us rang gently in the breeze. Mia turned to me and asked, "Do you think justice always comes?" I thought about it carefully. "No," I said, "but sometimes it comes back around in the form of someone who remembers." She leaned back, eyes closed. "Then maybe that's all we can be, reminders that the story isn't over." And for the first time, I saw peace settle across her shoulders, not like a burden laid down, but like a robe worn proudly. It didn't erase the scars, but it crowned them. And as the wind whispered through the trees, we sat together in the hush of what remained, truth, grief, and the unshakable echo of a woman whose name now meant not silence, but strength. The first snow arrived early that year, blanketing our street in silence. I stood at the front window, coffee in hand, watching as flakes settled gently on the porch where Rebecca once sat knitting, humming old jazz tunes under her breath. The world had changed so much since then, shaped and shaken by truth spoken aloud and the courage of a daughter who refused to look away. Mia came down the stairs quietly, pulling on her scarf and gloves, preparing for her last advisory board meeting of the year. "They're voting on the final clause today," she said, voice calm but alert. "The one that protects not just whistleblowers, but their families." I didn't say anything at first. I just reached for her coat, helped her into it like I used to do when she was 10. "Make sure they remember why this matters," I said. "Make them say her name." She nodded, eyes wet but focused. "I will." That evening, she returned with the kind of exhaustion that spoke of battles hard won. She dropped her bag, kicked off her boots, and simply said, "Passed, unanimously." I poured 2 glasses of wine, and we sat by the fire in quiet victory. "They're going to call it the Morgan Amendment," she added after a while. "It mandates transparency protocols and psychological support for families caught in retaliation." I felt my throat tighten. "She'd be proud," I managed. "She is," Mia said. "She's in every sentence I wrote, every clause I fought for. She didn't need a headline. She didn't need a monument. What she'd built was sturdier than stone." The next morning, I watched Mia draft a letter to Javier, her student who had once drawn that candle in the storm. She wrote about the vote, about what it meant, and then added one final line that caught in my chest. "Justice is not a door we open, one seats a hallway we must walk daily." Later that week, she announced her decision to take a sabbatical. "It's time to rebuild from the inside," she told her students, who protested tearfully but understood. She spent the next months restoring pieces of her own life. She adopted an old rescue dog from the shelter, graying, anxious but with a spark in its eye. She named him Harold, after Rebecca's favorite fictional detective. Together, they walked the neighborhood like sentinels of quiet change. One Saturday, Mia visited the old research lab where it all began. The security guard, now retired, had left a note for her in the visitor's log. "She lit the way. You cleared the path. Thank you." She didn't cry, not there. She just stood in the sterile hallway and let the silence hold her. When she returned home, she placed her ID badge from that day in a shadow box beside Rebecca's first teaching certificate. "They belong together," she said simply. And I agreed. As spring neared, the house buzzed again with familiar life. Mia hosted small gatherings, former students, colleagues, young women seeking guidance. The living room transformed into a quiet sanctuary where questions were welcome and doubt was not weakness but a tool. I often stayed back, just listening from the hallway. The laughter, the passionate debates, the awkward silences, it all reminded me of our kitchen table when Rebecca was alive, lecturing with fire in her eyes and love in her voice. One evening, Mia read aloud a new piece she'd been working on. It wasn't an academic paper or a policy draft, it was a letter, written to her future daughter. "I don't know if you'll ever exist," she read softly, "but if you do, I want you to know your grandmother fought with everything she had, and I carried the torch not to be remembered, but to remind the world not to forget." Her voice trembled on that last line, and I found myself weeping quietly behind the kitchen door. That summer, the university held a dedication ceremony for the Morgan Initiative. They unveiled a new wing, housing a research center, a student clinic, and a library named after Rebecca. Mia refused the spotlight. Instead, she stood in the crowd, hand over her heart as students read aloud from testimonials of lives changed, voices found, fears conquered. A plaque was installed at the entrance, etched with words Mia had once spoken. Truth may bend in the wind, but it does not break if we carry it together. People touched the plaque as they passed, as if drawing strength from it. I watched as a young girl placed a white rose at its base, whispering something no one else could hear. In the final days of summer, Mia and I sat on the porch again, Harold snoozing at our feet. "Do you think she'd be happy with how it turned out?" she asked suddenly. "I think," I said slowly, "she'd be furious it ever had to come to this, but she'd be proud you never gave up." Mia smiled. "That's enough." The sun dipped low, casting the house in golden light. It no longer felt like a place haunted by loss. It felt like a home rebuilt on memory, justice, and unwavering love. And on Father's Day, a full year since she asked that question, Mia walked me through the front door and said, "Dad, I didn't just want you to like this house. I wanted you to see what she built through me, what we built together." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small wooden box, and handed it to me. Inside was a key, etched with the words, "For the house justice built." I looked at her speechless. "It's yours now," she said. "This story, this place, it belongs to you too." That night, long after the last guest had gone, I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by echoes and photographs, and finally allowed myself to whisper, "Rebecca, she did it." And maybe, just maybe, I felt her whisper back, carried on the wind. So did you. This story reminds us that justice does not arrive on its own. It needs torchbearers, storytellers, and hearts brave enough to remember what others wish to forget.